Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're visiting Loveland, Colorado, which we've been to before in some of our earlier videos. We actually went to a couple of different sculpture parks which were absolutely amazing, and I learned that Loveland is actually the capital of art here in Colorado, and absolutely a wonderful place to stop. Right as you go into the Rocky Mountains, the town just kind of opens up and welcomes you in, and you can find just about everything that you could possibly need before going toward the Rockies. So today we decided that we were going to stop by the Loveland Museum, where they have part history, part art, and a lot of fun. So let's go explore. Now we are starting off in the art gallery side, and actually we're going to go around and look at the different pieces, but we're looking for these. These are actually the pieces of information that we're needing to find out a little bit more about each one of the displays. If you look at this, you can see the little texture in each of these little tiny pinpoints. Pretty neat way to start off our trip through the gallery. But as we continue through, you'll notice no two displays are the same. This one really calls out to me because it looks like stained glass. It's so neat. But in fact, if you look right here, it actually says that this is regular canvas. Now, the reason why I personally like to come into places like this is because it kind of is a different experience for each human that comes in and lays eyes on it. Whenever you're looking at something, you may take away one feeling or one thought, while the next person might see something totally different. And I love that. So art is so interpretive, and it's really cool to come in here and see the difference in each individual section. And I'm here for it. Now, as you go outside, you'll notice that there's also some additional art, and it's really neat. It's a great place if you're interested in finding a cool selfie spot to take some selfies. And also, as you kind of explore through downtown, you'll see that continued onward. This is a really neat community, and I've always enjoyed coming here, but until I really started going around downtown, I had no idea how expansive it was. If you're looking at this piece from a distance, it's pretty interesting looking. It casts some really cool shadows, it has some neat textures, but once you get in closer, what are these? These are actually T tags. All of these are T tags. Now, when you come to visit, they may have different art altogether because these are rotating exhibits. However, these are collections that they have been curated and put together for this particular time. They're called light effects and flashpoints. So as you're going around, you can kind of see which collection they belong to, and it's so neat because vastly different. And so we're going to kind of continue to look at some of the fine, minute little details that really appeal to me. It's a really neat way to see how someone's thought process transforms onto all of these different spaces right here. This right here is one of two canvases that actually use beeswax, resin, and earth pigments. And whenever you pull away from them, they make these really interesting looking paintings, but there's actually two of them. So whenever you get up close, you get to see those intricate symbols, but whenever you get further away, it's just a different story altogether. Now, like I said before, no two people can come in and experience this the exact same way, and that's what's really neat about it. And I realize not everybody loves to look at art, but at the same time, if you take a moment and you glance around a gallery, there's always one piece that kind of gets you intrigued that you walk up to and go, huh, and I really like that. Now for me, this particular room in here shows that off. I love colors, bright, vibrant colors. And if you look at it, it's kind of like a magic eye. You start to see really unique things. So I'm going to show you a couple of my favorites on this side. See if you can see anything. Now I really like this one because of the colors. I'm a super bright color person. It's called Sweet Tea, and it's by a lady named Patricia Aaron. It's pretty interesting because if you'll notice that there's like little intentional drips in it. There's some little harsh lines where it looks like there's almost like a trowel in it. And when I pull back away from it, I just really like how up here it starts out nice and soft, and then down here it's much more intentional and like harsh. It's just a really cool, bright colored painting. And this one is probably at least 15 feet wide. It's huge and actually takes up 4 different boards. Down below looks kind of like the grass with flowers, and it's so pretty. And then you have the sky above. It's just absolutely interesting. And sure enough, this is by Patricia Aaron also, and it is the Hills of Luberon, and that's a province in France. So it is actually a hillside. So see, sometimes something like this is just super easy to interpret. And if you look at it long enough, you can see each one of these little colors is actually a flower. And then you can see that the sky has all of these crazy tones to it, kind of like the skies that I've been seeing. Like I said, the sunsets and sunrises here in Colorado have so many brilliant, beautiful colors. Now this one's something a little bit different to look at. On here, it actually says it is hidden in plain sight. It is a blue labyrinth. And if you look at the circled portion, it is dot, dot, dash. This one right here is a little bit different, but it relates to the one that is beside it. Right here. Who else wants to do some tracing with your finger? Nope, nope, don't touch. Again though, art takes on many forms, from the more abstract to something like this that we could actually conceptualize a thought as to what it is. It's pretty neat. So this entire gallery is filled with those kind of little eye challenges, and it's really fun. What do you see here? If you said that you see some form of flower, you are correct. This one's called Blossoms. And in similar nature and by the same artist, this one is actually called Floating Garden. Now, not all art comes on just a plain canvas. Sometimes you have something that is delicately woven, like this tapestry. This tapestry is actually called the Song of Sorrow. And then these are actually digital prints that are mounted on wood panels. And there is a series of these, all of which I think are kind of interesting because they really play with your mind on what it would be like to have an image, inverse the image, and flip it around and do some crazy stuff with it. And then I want to wrap up this gallery kind of with this right here. This actually reminds me a lot of a place that we've been before. This reminds me of Meow Wolf. And the reason why it does is because it looks like they've taken some very basic materials right here and transformed them into all of these different things. And that's what Meow Wolf does. They use creative approaches to very common things. So when you're going through this like fun house of amazingness, you might see something that you have at your house that you never thought of as art, but suddenly it becomes part of this magical world. So yeah, as you kind of look around, you'll see very common things used in so many different ways. Okay, adventurers, up we go. Now, after traveling forward up the stairs, we actually saw a post office. Why? Well, Loveland is actually quite the interesting community. In fact, sending a love letter from Loveland, can you imagine? Yeah, it's actually a thing. So you can be my Valentine any time of year here in Loveland. But first, we have to navigate the post office. In the post office, we find this special delivery. And actually, it's pretty neat because some of these faces are very familiar. From my previous trip to Loveland, I learned about Louis Papa. Louis Papa was actually born in the Oregon Territory to a Native American mother, French trapper father. He ended up here in this area, and actually there is a roadside stop that is signature to him. He actually owned the land that became known for the generator systems off of the waterway, and there is a statue at the Benson Sculpture Park with his likeness. Now the flag is up, so that means there's supposed to be a package or a letter, but I don't see any. But there is a little mail truck, and I will say this. This looks a little bit different than my dad's mail truck because my dad is a mailman. But this looks like the ones that they use in towns like this, so that totally makes sense. Now, Loveland has been known as the sweetheart city of the U.S., and they actually had Miss Loveland Valentine at one point. And look at this. This is so cool. These are some of the little pieces that they have here in the museum of that special title, in addition to all of these special stamps that they would use for all of the Valentines. And there are so many there. That is so neat. And each one of them is labeled with the year, if you'll notice. 1947, 1951, looks like 1990 even. Now, it also shows in this case that they actually had the very first Miss Loveland Valentine in 1962, but they also had this guy right here, the Cupid Cowboy. That's so fun. And as we continue to walk through this area, we can see even more of that legacy. This right here is worth stopping at the museum, if nothing else, just because this is the sweetheart city. And you can see how their traditions and legacies have lived on throughout the years. I mean, it kind of makes sense. When you go through town, you see these huge hearts. And there is a sign actually that says love, and it's huge. It's like the one that they have in Vegas, but it's outside where you can get to it at any time, and it's all lit up at night. It's so neat. Now, it says here that the first official Loveland Chamber of Commerce Valentine made its debut in 1964. And Ted Thompson and the Loveland art director actually designed a Valentine. They sold them for 25 cents at the local businesses, and they were accompanied by envelopes stamped with the 1964 stamp. The first official Loveland Valentine card actually featured an original watercolor painting. And from there, it continued onward. And then we get to this part right here. This is really cool. January 1983, headmaster of the post office in Japan actually wrote them. You may be surprised to receive this letter, but I wonder if you probably heard about the campaign we have been doing in connection with the wonderful Valentine remailing program with the help of a lovely lady from your city. So all the way in Japan, this had reached Japan by 1983. So the remailing program that they're actually talking about is pretty cool because it says right here, each Valentine that actually comes through the post office, they have volunteers who take care of it and make sure that it gets the correct stamp, sent to the correct place. It's a big thing. But not only that, but right here, every February here in Loveland, the streets are filled with these big wooden hearts. Such a cool thing, right? These big wooden hearts probably look something like this right here. But not only are they filled with these hearts can be customized with pretty much anything as long as it's, appropriate, even foreign languages. So it's the lovingest city in all of America at that time. That explains why it's called the Sweetheart City. Totally does. And wait, one more thing, guys. You can get your picture taken with this. So now that we've seen the reason why Loveland is called Sweetheart City and a really cool art gallery, what's next? Well, it's time for us to move on down the way and find out. We next move into the history side of the museum, and it is really neat down here too. Everything is themed, so as you're walking through you get to see what the building might have looked like, what's going on inside, and some interactive exhibits. So let's go and explore. Now, as we walk through history, one of my favorite places to always stop is the print shop. I used to work in newsprint, so this is really exciting for me because this is like where that began. So I thought it was only fitting to, while we're at the museum, start at the newspaper. So here we go. We actually see some of the machines that might have been used, some of the typesetting, and then also some photos of them actually rolling out some of the newspapers. It's a really, really neat place to start, and I'm going to show you why. So a long time ago, they didn't have computers like we have, and each one of these actually was a single letter, number, or statement that they would use frequently, and these had to be made. So then they would take those and they would line them up and make the actual print that would go on the paper. And then you can see right here on that bottom part, that's actually them lining up all of the different pieces. Sometimes they would build ads where they were a solid piece, and then they would just run that particular ad. They didn't change ads like they do now quite as frequently. And then as the newspaper would come out, it would come out on these big, huge rolls that looked like this, and then it would be hand cut. Now the machines do most of that for you. I think next up we'll speak about the blacksmith. We have this awesome blacksmith shop that not only plays sound when you come past it, like there's a blacksmith back here actually hammering something, but you can also hear the occasional horse from the horse stalls up here. Now, in any community, the blacksmith was one of the most important people because they would do everything from make tools to shoe the horses, and you needed all of those things. But this particular exhibit doesn't just talk about the importance of the blacksmith, it talks about the blacksmith who was physically here in the Loveland area. Way back in 1879, Loveland looks a lot different, doesn't it? In fact, these are some historic photos that they have collected and shared here at the museum. It says in 1879 that George Foote and Virgil Stoddard actually founded the Foote and Stoddard Library. And it was here at the southeast corner of what is now 4th Street in Cleveland. Now, unlike a lot of blacksmith, they actually did a little bit more. They actually dealt with feed and then horse sale also. So they were quite busy here, and they were quite the hub of all sorts of activities. So this is a neat exhibit. Now behind me, this poor unfortunate soul has made his way to jail. The city jail was actually established in 1881 when the city was only 250 people. It wasn't very big, and it was actually said to be about as uncomfortable as a pair of tight shoes because it was so tiny. In fact, the tiny little jail that was in existence stayed in existence for about the first 20 years behind City Hall and was not a place of comfort whatsoever. Also in 1881, they established their first sets of ordinances, and some of those were quite interesting. It says here that their first 6 ordinances were passed in 1881, and the first one was a herd law, stating that any loose horses, mules, cattle, sheep, or swine were considered to be a nuisance. That would be a penalty and could end up with people spending some time in this uncomfortable cell right here. Now, I think the best part of this one is that this is the original door from the jail right here. So the 1881 door right there in the museum. Now, before there was Amazon, before there was Walmart, there was the general store, and the general store had literally everything. So you could order things to come into the store and wait a little while, kind of like we do now, but you'd be waiting for quite some time. Typically people shopped off shelf instead, and they would get fabrics, food, tools, stuff like that. So inside this general store you can find a little bit of everything you would have had at the time. Now, if you didn't see it here, again, it was gonna take a while to get it. There was no next day shipping. So let's see what they have inside the general store. Now, this right here is actually a colorized version of the store that was actually located at 234 East 4th Street. And you can find most of the items that you see in display here. But this was the actual store itself right here in this picture. There were no fancy scales at that time, so this is how that they would measure weight. There were no digital calculators, so this is how they would ring up groceries. There was no Joann's and no Michael's, so this is where they would get everything that they could make their clothes out of, from patterns to thread to material. At the time, there weren't all of the nice designer shoes that we have now. they were pretty much standard. These were some of the fancier items that they might have had in the general store. And these porcelain dolls, oh wow, these are neat. But look at this. This was a viewmaster of the day. Of course, lining your shelves, you had some of your canned goods for groceries. There weren't near as many brands back then though as we have now. And this is how they kept it all warm. No central heat and air. Now, if you were a kid back in the 1800s, you didn't have video games, you didn't have all of the high-tech toys that we have today. So you had to make do with what you had. And these might have been some of the things that you could find. Marbles were extremely popular. Dolls, like this one right here. And then did you know that they actually had toys that had parts that would move on their own and they called them automatas? It's kind of neat. Now, in many of the places that we have been, we have seen historic hotels, and Loveland also was the home of historic hotels. There's some really neat artifacts in here and some facts, so let's go browse around. Now, the Loveland House was the first hotel here in the Loveland area. It was a small frame home-like structure, but it came into existence in 1877, right after the railway came through and actually connected Denver and Cheyenne. So this is what the inside might have looked like. Now, a glimpse through these windows actually shows us a time that was way more simple. Look at this, horse and buggy. Everything was a little bit more primitive than it is now. But the people who would typically stay at the Loveland House were said to be going on their way to the Estes Park area, and they would stay here as kind of like a layover. The views of downtown would have been a little bit more like this than they are currently. Instead of the triple and quadruple stacked buildings, they would have at tops a double-decker, and then you can see here just a nice open field even in the background, because it was still in the early stages of Loveland. Of course, Loveland in present day is a booming metropolis of people and businesses, and you can't turn a single corner in this section of town without finding another business, or even a little further out, homes. It is much different than whenever it started out, but this place right here actually laid the groundwork for all of the different stops for tourism today. Now, going along the same lines, this might have been what the Loveland area looked like in the 1900s. Farms were extremely popular at that time. A lot of people here who were settling had a plot of land and maybe a few cows to graze it. The town was very different then. Now, during the time that these farms were in existence, they had the leading stock, of course, of cattle, but they also produced corn and potatoes as some of their leading crops. So Loveland right here, as we know it today, all started on the backs of these hard-working farmers that built up the community, brought money in, did all of the different kinds of trades, and then Loveland was able to grow and grow and grow. No, it is not Halloween. This is in fact the doctor's office, and this is what might have been found inside of the doctor's office in the early days of Loveland. It says here that there are actually a few similarities to modern day medicine within this room right here. Can you spot them? Now, it says here that if you look inside and you look up here, Dr. McFadden, some of the items inside were his. He was the actual doctor that they're referencing for this exhibit from the early 20th century. But there were actually several other doctors and dentists in the area. So that's kind of a neat little fact. As Loveland continued to grow, more medical professionals actually started coming to this area because of the need. It was starting to get a little crazy here. Now, this is actually a Spanish dagger-style knife. And it is the only object in the museum collection that actually belonged to Mariano. But who was Mariano? This was Mariano. He was a 5'2" mountain man, and he was a rugged person. He could do a lot of things, but this thing that he's actually displayed by right here, this is a replica of his actual mountain cabin. Manuel Medina was actually born in Taos, New Mexico. He was a friend of the infamous Kit Carson. But Mariano didn't always stay a trapper. In fact, he saw an opportunity and he started to build businesses in the area. He was one of the first people to do so, and boy, did he build big, according to this. This photo is actually a photo of his original homestead area that was pictured in 1902. And it says here that after he moved to the area, he saw the opportunity and started a store, a saloon, cabins to rent, and a livery stable. And then he erected a flagpole with a white flag on it. And when he was asked why, he said it was because he was at peace with all nations. Kind of a neat story, right? I think it's awesome. I love coming places like this because while we did enjoy the art, the history is always what paints the picture of the community that we're in, and this is such a cool story. I mean, we're this close to Rocky Mountain National Park, and this man saw an opportunity and moved in for the taking. Of course, that was long before it was Rocky Mountain National Park, so yeah, he was just the first. He was a pioneer. In fact, Loveland is packed full of those kind of really interesting stories. Behind us, we actually have the story of alabaster. In front of us, we have two samples, one of finished alabaster and one of rough alabaster. But why? This right here is not your typical alabaster shop though. This is actually the Proctors Alabaster gift shop that was located on Highway 34. It was donated to the museum and taken apart and reconstructed in part so that we could see it today. A really neat thing. Now, the Proctor family owned and operated this alabaster shop for quite some time. People could stop in and find anything from little trinkets to big things. It was quite a stop here in the Loveland area, and it has quite the history. And so I think it's only fitting that we talk about these notorious residents. Inside this case, we see not only a series of pictures, but also a timeline of the alabaster rock shop. They opened it originally in 1936. Their demand for products was increased, so in 1941, they actually had to build a secondary location away from their home. Now, this was quite the business. As you can see, people are just going to town, working, and actually this stayed in business for quite some time. In fact, it only had a pause during the war, and they had to walk away from it for a temporary time. The demand called them back to the shop, and they ran and operated until the early 70s. At that time, Earl actually passed away. Now, this was a family-owned business, so that was absolutely devastating, and they went ahead and sold off their merchandise and decided it was time to close. But they didn't do so without first deciding that this was an important legacy that they wanted to hold on to, and they made a commitment here a little bit later after that to bring this to fruition. Did you know that Loveland also has a history with sugar? And we're not talking about the kind from upstairs. No, this is actually sugar beets. So this entire exhibit talks about the history of sugar beets in Loveland. There's actually a timeline of the Great Western Sugar Company from 1901 to 1985 right here in the back of the exhibit, along with a touch screen to tell you a little bit more about this particular crop. You can actually pick out different pieces. Let's go to the sugar press to see what it says. Oh wow, this is all of the different publications. That is awesome. So you can literally go through the annals of time here and pick different kinds of topics that all relate to the sugar beets. Now, if you've watched my channel before, you know I love a good interactive exhibit, so this one's awesome. You could literally be at this one for an hour or two, just reading through all the different articles. It's kind of fascinating, but that's only the beginning. In this section, you can learn about the production, how it starts, how it finishes, and everything in between. All of the equipment that they use, the people, everything. And along the walls, you can read about the different portions of this production and see some of the real-life people who were affiliated with it. It's hard to beat all of the information about beets. Get it? If you've enjoyed coming along, make sure that you hit a like, subscribe, and check out all of my future content. And while you're at it, go check out those 2 videos I did of Loveland last time. You'll like them. They're pretty exceptional. Till next time, guys. Bye!